Hello and welcome to Green Pass Gaming. I am your host Flap. Hopefully everyone can hear us because we was having a few technical issues last week with OBS, but hopefully we don't have that this week. So welcome to the show, everyone. Got an absolutely fantastic show lined up tonight. Very excited. Got the GPG crew back together, all four of us. So it's great to have everyone back. And talk about some fantastic topics that's been happening this week. So what have we got in store for you guys tonight? So we've got our Xbox gunning for the PC market. That's going to be quite an interesting topic to cover, actually, because I've got a funny feeling that with what's happened this week, that there might be some things happening where Microsoft are perhaps pushing a little bit stronger in the PC market. We're also going to talk about whether Metacritic's had its day. Borrowed this topic from actually Stubbs Gaming Midweek podcast. A really great topic, actually. So it's going to be interesting to dive into that, and I'm really interested to know what the panel think, and obviously you guys in the chat. Huge revenues posted by both Xbox and PlayStation. Great to see that our gaming hobby, as it is doing so well. And we absolutely love the fact that, this hobby is as fantastic as it is. We've got, so many things. We've got more FPS games inbound coming very soon, apparently. Apparently there's about 50 games coming, so we'll have a quick discussion about that. We've also got a question from our Discord, but before we do any of that, let's introduce our fantastic GPG Crew panel, and we'll go in order, as always. Luke Steele, top of the shop. How are you, my friend?
Oh, I'm very well, thank you. Yes, very happy to be here. Even happier that it's a public holiday tomorrow.
It does make a difference, doesn't it?
It does. It does. It means I don't have to go to bed slightly depressed that it's Monday. So that's good. I'm really looking forward to this. Some really cool topics. Different kind of tact for this show, I think. Different approach. So it's going to be really cool, and I'm delighted to be here.
No, absolutely. And you know what? You've hit quite upon a salient point there. We do like to cover the current and topical news because obviously, that's what's in everyone's mind. It's what's in the community. But I am also conscious that we go out on a Sunday and probably all of everyone's favourite podcasts they've been listening to have been discussing exactly the same topics. And, I appreciate people may want to hear our take on things, but also, I like to try and expand into some slightly wider topics. And it's always great it's always those topics that actually get me excited and fire me up because I never know what's coming. But, to help us out, my wingman, Huxley, how the devil are you, sir? Are you pleased it's not a work day tomorrow?
Oh, definitely. And I mean, I say celebrated. We met up with some friends yesterday, and for the first time in a very long time, we actually had a bit of a drinking sesh. I have to be honest. So a number of beers, ciders, and then it ended on gin actually. So I was a little bit delicate this morning, but I'm feeling good. All right, I'm feeling good now.
You got your headset turned right down. We're not too loud in your ears then.
No, I'm perfectly recovered. I went out for a nice afternoon walk, so I'm nicely recovered.
Okay, well, that's cool. Well, for our international friends, the UK's kind of slowly coming out of lockdown, so going to the pub and socialising is a thing of reality all of a sudden. So, no, that's pretty cool. Scott, have you been out? You're from Newcastle, aren't you? You up that northeast?
Yeah, not directly from Newcastle, a little close by, but I've not had the pleasure of venturing out anywhere just yet, actually. So
not gone for a Newcastle Brown yet, then?
No, I'm not a brown ale kind of guy, mate. If I'm being perfectly honest,
okay.
I'm like Pucks. I'm more of a gin and tonic kind of guy myself. So a little bit more of an acquired taste, I think, rather than that brew ale as they'll call it up here. So
brew ale. Well, I'm heading up your way next week, actually, up in the northeast. But gin has had quite a big sort of rejuvenation in this country, at least. I think the big gin purveyors have been pushing that. Cider had it a decade or so ago, didn't it? They was pushing cider and trying to reinvent it, and I think gin's the new reinvented drink at the moment. But no, that's cool. Chat, fantastic. Got so many familiar faces in there. I absolutely love seeing the people flood into our chat. Let's just do a very quick roll call before we get started with the show. Thank you all for being here. We've got my Secco, we've got Matt Dyatt, UK Dazrus, welcome my friend Jadzilla Music, always great to see you. Parksy, fantastic. Pixel Slapper, Warlocky 71, I'm guessing that's 1971. Oh, it's just great to see you guys here. Thank you all for being here, and please get involved in the chat with the topics that we're going to be discussing. And let's kick off with the first one, shall we? And we'll come to you, Luke, first, as you're top of the screen. So this week, Microsoft reported that they were going to be reducing the fee that they were going to take from devs to be sold via the Microsoft Store in Win 10. And the fee looks like it's going to be dropped from the 1st of August, so we're a little way out yet, and it's going to be dropping from 30% down to 12%, which I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, brings it in line with what the Epic Store charge to use their services. Seems like Steam, I think they're still, at the moment, seems like they're sticking with the 30%, but I'm guessing Steam, you could call them kind of the market leader when it comes to selling games via an online store. I think you'd probably be hard pushed to think that Steam wasn't the leader in that. But I found this very interesting because I know Microsoft sell Xbox games on Steam. So it almost kind of seems like they're trying to muscle in a little bit via their own store. And let's all be honest, let's all call a spade here. The Microsoft store is quite an atrocious place to buy games from. What do you think Microsoft's tactic behind this is? Are they actually starting to push to want to be, become the place that the PC gamers go to buy their games from? What's this move all about, do you think?
I think it's probably a bit multifaceted in that I think a chunk of it is just Microsoft wanting to make their own store more accessible to developers, to try and entice developers to release their games on the Microsoft Store as well as on Steam. I don't think they're gunning necessarily to try and usurp Steam. It's probably bad business for them to try and do that, to try and take people away from that platform. Because no doubt, as people will have seen over the last few months, actually, the Microsoft published games that are popping up there are doing incredibly well. But I think this is probably just phase one of them trying to make their store more attractive wholesale. Because as you said, it's pretty bad. Like, it's really quite bad. The kind of Microsoft Store, Windows integration stuff. It just doesn't, and this is on the user side, right? I'm not sure how it is for developers. But I think it's a really quite a classy move, actually, because it's trying to say to developers, look, you deserve more money in your pocket for the game that you bring here, right? And if you bring it here, from 1st of August, we'll give you a bigger cut, and that's always a really good thing. I don't know, as I say, how it fits in overall as to the direction they're going with the store, other than to try and make it more accessible. But I think it's just to me, it seems like just another part of their commitment to the PC space, to try and bring together all stakeholders there, so gamers, developers, etc. And it's good to see. The next step, or surely the next step, is to try and rejuvenate and kind of reintegrate their gaming store to make it something that's far more accessible and works a lot better, because that's going to be that will be one of the big things that gets people, gamers at least, open and over to it ahead of Steam or on par with Steam. I mean, it's going to be, if their aim is to try and become, the third big player in that space, it's going to be incredibly difficult, because Steam is so dominant that I don't know whether, how you attract people. I mean, I think we've discussed before, there are some ways they can do that, but it's interesting nonetheless, and I think it's a good sign from them, after neglecting that space for so many years, that they're actually trying to make amends now.
I think it's interesting that it's coming perhaps 1st of August, because I've heard rumours that there are some big store updates coming around that sort of time. So it would kind of make sense for that to happen at that sort of time. And using Steam myself, it does provide many services that actually Xbox does as well. There's obviously in-game messaging. You can do party chats and stuff like that. So, Microsoft do have the chops to be able to do that. They just don't have the market share, I guess. And it did seem like they were going to try. Okay, I agree. They're not going to surpass Steam, but it did seem like they were going to certainly try and, I don't know, kind of square up to them a little bit, perhaps, and try and claw some of that. Some of that revenue back to their own store, because I think they have been reluctantly letting it go. Steam take the majority of the sales for these sort of games, and I think perhaps they want to redesign it and refocus where they are in the market with regards to that sort of things. Pucks, do you actually ever buy anything off the Microsoft Store? I've got to be honest, I don't.
No, not at all. In terms of on Xbox, I mean, the most recent game, or the only game I've ever bought, was the Pumpkin Jack a couple of weeks ago. Obviously, because that's the only means to buy it on Xbox. But outside of that, on PC, for example, I only use the Microsoft Store app on PC to get updates for the Xbox games I have installed, or through the Xbox app. It's the most convenient way I find to get like a bulk batch of updates done. But no, outside of that, I never use it. And as Luke was saying earlier, the general kind of tile-based user interface is, I don't know, it was kind of like part of the Windows 8 updates, number of years ago now. And I think Microsoft have this trend of trying to keep this thing consistent. Like they're trying to stick with this tiles format. And I don't know, for me, it just doesn't quite work very well. I mean, I don't think it's very clear is what I'm trying to say. But they're very consistent. They want to keep it, and I hope they're doing a big revamp. So to answer your question, no, I don't really like the store, and I've never really bought anything from it, especially on PC.
So knowing, so let's say let's say Tunic. Tunic comes out and it's on both. Where do you buy Tunic? Do you buy it on the Microsoft Store, knowing that the devs may be getting more profit out of it, or do you buy it on Steam?
Do you mean on PC only?
Yeah.
I would buy it on Steam.
Is that because that's where all your friends are and
not just that? It's where pretty much the large bulk of my PC collection is. Like my current Steam collection is, I don't know, 200 plus games, and a lot of those are like humble bundles from over a number of years. And I mean, I did sign up to the Epic Games Store as well when that first became a thing, when it was all brand new, and obviously they have their free games initiative. So I've kind of got libraries of game collections in a number of places. So I mean, Steam being kind of one of the main ones for PC, Epic Games Store is not too far behind now. That's slowly creeping up. But then you've even got like on Twitch Prime as well. They have loads of games you can claim for free every month or a couple of weeks, and I've got a massive library there as well. So I do have massive libraries of kind of free gotten gains all over the shop. But in terms of where I'd buy things, it would probably be on Steam. And I don't think most people, I mean, I appreciate a lot of people want to support the developers, but I think overall most people want to buy in the place that they feel is most convenient for them, if that makes sense. Not necessarily where they think the developers would benefit most, because as much as we all want to support developers, I think the overall majority of gamers, PC or otherwise, they just want to buy the game on the most convenient and often used storefront they have and just play the games they enjoy. Right? I think the business side of things for the large majority of gamers, casual and hardcore, I'd argue, may not care so much about how the developers do, because I believe it's often assumed that if a game is selling well by numbers, then the developer must be doing well, regardless of whether or not they actually have to give a 30% cut or an 18% cut, if that makes sense.
Yeah. There's also, just to jump in as well, there's also an issue which Microsoft and I mean Epic are facing this as well, in trying to get into this space and attract people over on PC over to their platforms, which is that before Steam, obviously PC gaming was effectively the Wild West. You didn't have any homogenized area where you could just access a library of games and then play them and have all these kind of linking accounts and, the kind of, achievement stuff, everything like that. And it's taken a long time to corral people into that. But now people are in that, they don't want to go away from it. You don't want to leave that environment, because it's the first time for a long time on PC where, you can literally just open up one application and you have all your games on it. And So anyone coming into that space is going to have huge difficulty in trying to move people over, and it's already becoming annoying when you have people like EA and Bethesda are two that do it, Ubisoft as well, where you're having to connect a third-party app to one of their games, even if you have it on Steam. Sometimes they don't do it. They don't do it all the time, but they do sometimes. And so there's no normal way to get around that apart from really do what Epic do, which is that you need to try and attract people through lots of free, interesting games, and also through having exclusive content that you can't get on Steam. And I don't particularly like that, but it is one way you can make people come over a bit. But if you looked at the early days of that, when Epic were doing it, for example, the games weren't doing that well because people were so stubborn in not wanting to actually go over. Control, for example, did not do in terms of pure sales on Epic Game Store. It didn't do very well. Obviously, Remedy got a significant amount of money from that deal, which I think was enough for them. But so it's really difficult. Like it's super hard to actually move people away. Like as one of those people, right? Like it's I don't really want to go away from Steam. I appreciate that developers will get more money on other storefronts perhaps, and that's great. But as Puck said, if the game's selling very well, then they're doing well by default of that. So it's hard.
Yeah, no, I completely get that. But and perhaps come to you, Scott. I think Microsoft do have something that no one else does, and this is going to seem a little bit strange at first, but they actually have Game Pass. And I'm just wondering if Game Pass could be the Trojan horse into this, because if they, as they do currently, if Game Pass was able to offer some fairly significant discounts on buying games and stuff via the store, whether that might be enough to sort of encourage people over. I completely agree, Luke, that at this moment in time it seems like Steam is a completely immovable object, and it would be David and Goliath basically. But I don't know. I think Microsoft are quite cunning. I do think they have Game Pass up their sleeve that they could use to perhaps not only entice people over to Game Pass to get the discounts on the games, but also sell the games themselves as well. What was your take on the move, Scott? Did you completely agree with Luke and Pucks?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, just to, I guess, caveat this with I'm not a PC gamer and haven't been for a number of years, so I've got maybe a slightly different perspective because I don't have. I mean, to be fair, I've got a library on Steam, but what's on there at the moment? Counter-Strike 1.6,
Wow.
Football Manager 2014, and then my Epic Game Store library is probably bigger than the one on Steam because even though I don't get it, I still swipe everything on from the free games each month. So I don't necessarily have that same, I guess, affiliation, or I don't use Steam the same way that a lot of PC gamers do. The way that I looked at it, and I don't think this in any way is to compete with something like Epic Game Store or Steam, if I'm being perfectly honest. I think they'll look at what Epic's done. And this Apple v Epic court case has been quite revealing recently, where it's revealed how Epic or the Epic Game Store isn't said to be profitable until something like 2027, if I remember correctly from what I read. Also, they're throwing a absolute shit ton of money at that to try and move people across, and that's proved to be extremely difficult. And that's Epic, who have arguably one of the biggest games in the world on that platform now. They moved things like Rocket League across. Obviously, they've got Fortnite. And then you also look at the success Microsoft's had on Steam, despite the Windows Store existing. So games like Sea of Thieves, Forza Horizon 4, that were previously available to purchase on the Windows Store, as soon as they moved over to Steam, they were top of the chart straight away. So there was obvious interest in those games. People wanted to play those games. People wanted to buy them, but they simply weren't willing to move away from Steam to do so.
So do you think they weren't buying them? Because Steam is very transparent, isn't it? I mean, I absolutely love Steam to be able to download its its top 20 lists and see what the current specs of the average PC gamer. I love all of that side of things, but I don't think the Microsoft Store's perhaps quite so transparent as that. Are we suggesting that when these titles were on the Microsoft Store, they weren't selling as well until they went to Steam?
Yeah, I'd say I can say that with 99.9% confidence. I think obviously I don't have the data to back that up, but I think it's evident that the Windows Store is holding back sales of games on PC, and that is why Microsoft have committed to Steam. I believe Halo Infinite's come to Steam day one. They've obviously started slowly but surely rolling out particularly their first party games. The back catalogue of games, like I say, Sea of Thieves, Forza Horizon 4 have come there recently, Age of Empires, games like that. And the reason for it is, what's the point in bringing exclusive content to the Windows Store if people simply aren't going to buy it there? Yes, they've got to pay Steam a certain cut, but if they're selling games there, at least the games are selling. And I think Luke, personally, I think Luke nailed it on the head pretty much with his first sentence. I think it's just about making the Windows Store more attractive to developers and publishers. And I think the reason for that is, even if the games aren't necessarily going to sell on there, if they have more developers supporting that particular platform because of that cut, I think this all just comes down to Game Pass. The more games they have via the Windows Store, the more games they, in theory, are able to support through Game Pass. You look at the argument with Outriders recently, comes to Game Pass on console, but it doesn't come to Game Pass on PC. And well, one of the reasons for that is it isn't on the Windows Store; it's only available via Steam. So they couldn't put it in to Game Pass for PC without the developers making that available or porting that over to the Windows Store, which I imagine there's a little bit of work in there. It's not just a case of, oh, here you go. It's now available there. There will be work to do so. And I guess it's trying to incentivize that work for developers and publishers to port the game over to the Windows Store. And then in theory, Microsoft can then start having conversations about Game Pass, whether that be for day one or in the future. I think personally, that's where this is coming from. And then eventually over time, what I imagine that would allow them to do is have parity between Game Pass for console and Game Pass for PC, which currently doesn't exist.
Yeah, no, all very, very interesting points. I've got to be honest. I've got to hold my hands up. I do play devil's advocate on this podcast quite a lot, and I know I pose what may seem like dumb questions, but it does tease out these kind of answers. And I've got to be honest, I do agree with most of the panel, but there is a part of me that thinks that Microsoft, they are quite cunning. They can be they can be very aggressive when they need to, and they don't often roll over and play dead. Perhaps as we've seen with the Xbox One, leading into the Series X generation, I think that really, they got a bloodied nose from that and they came out fine. I agree, Steam, like I say, would be a David and Goliath situation, but I don't think Microsoft, they've obviously still got a vested interest in selling games via their store, and perhaps there is a much longer and slower game that they're playing with this, but perhaps not. Well, time will tell on that one, I guess. But chat, thank you very much for being here. It's fantastic. Great to see. We've got a few new faces in there as well. Pucks, is there anything we need to catch up on with the chat?
I've only got 2 comments saved, actually. I'll quickly read out. I've got one here from a Pixel Slapper who... Oh, sorry, no, I've got 3. Well, first one here from Judezilla Music, who said, this is regarding Luke's comments earlier, saying that they should be aiming to match Steam. I think you're right. They won't surpass it. I
don't think they'll surpass it. I think they are.
They won't surpass it. They said, sorry.
Yeah, I think they're trying to wedge, as the panel have said, they're trying to wedge more into the PC sort of gaming market like that. And yeah, it's just interesting to see how they could integrate some of this into their current services and some of the offerings that they could sell. Because, one of the things that they've done in Game Pass and in the console market is just made it such great value for money that it's almost... people would take issue with this, but almost foolish not to have Game Pass in lots of regards because it's great value. And if they could bring something like that to PC, and I appreciate games are a lot cheaper on PC, and there's already a huge monster in Steam that exists on there. But it'd be interesting to see what happens.
Next comment, is from Pixel Slapper. So they said, people forget tracking people's habits is what Game Pass offers them as a side revenue. I love it, they say. Mm-hmm. And another one here from UK Dazarus who says, Steam is cool if you have a decent PC. I love achievements on Xbox and Steam.
Yes, obviously Steam has achievements as well, which is quite cool. I like achievements. We did that topic about a month or 2 ago, didn't we? But
yeah, I mean, not to bring that up again, but I enjoy PlayStation trophies a bit. I enjoy Steam achievements a bit. But again, for someone who likes that kind of thing, there's just something about the way Xbox has done it that I've always just preferred the most. I don't know whether it's just because I was, I first got exposed to it in the 360 era. They were kind of the first people to do it, at least from a mainstream perspective, as far as I remember. And maybe it's just stuck with me there. But yeah, I just like the way it's done on Xbox. It just seems to, I like to try and get them, whereas on the other platforms, I'm not too fast, if you get what I mean.
No, absolutely. No, completely concur. Before we
And
move
that's
on,
it for
actually,
the comments, by the way. Yep.
yeah, no, that's fine. Yeah, I kind of guessed. Before we move on, actually, I just need to make a shout out for this game. This is the Gardens Between. It's currently available free in inverted commas on Game Pass. Well worth checking out. It's probably 3 hours long. Thanks to Matt Dyatt for bringing this to my attention. Great little game. It literally uses one button and a thumbstick. And you'd think, well, how can you make a game out of that? But it really is. It's a great little game. Worth downloading. It's only tiny, and you get quite a few achievements out of it as well. If you're an achievement
easy 1,000
hunter.
gamer score.
Exactly. But no, it's a great little game. So definitely go and check it out. I always try and play games that are on Game Pass and that are worth checking out. So fantastic. Excellent. So we've got a few new people in the chat. Let's just do a quick indies in the chat. Hello, Joe Bailey, welcome. Who else do we have? JNL Destiny 2 News. Excellent. Great to see you guys here. Thank you for being here. Should we move on with topic 2, gents? In fact, before we do, we actually had a question from Pyro Matt. He posted it on our Discord channel. Please, if you haven't joined our Discord channel, there's an invitation in the descriptions and the links below. So go and check that out. Actually, just before we do the question, this game's flicked over. This is Greedfall, which is also in Game Pass. This is running on PC currently, but this is a great little game. Actually, I've really enjoyed my time with this so far. Perhaps we'll talk about that a bit later. But we've got a question from Pyro Matt. Question for this week's panel. As a gamer, what is more important to you, graphics or gameplay? I'm guessing you mean performance. Luke, just quickly, we have kind of covered these topics a few times, haven't we? Are you a graphics or a gameplay person, as in performance?
Ideally both. But if I had to choose one, it's always gameplay. Yeah. It doesn't matter visually what it looks like. If it's
Now you say that, and until probably fairly recently, I would have absolutely agreed. But a couple of weeks ago, Pux and I were playing Battlefield 5, and actually we were playing with Matt Burns. He jumped on with us just right, and I tried out the 120 frames per second mode on Battlefield 5, and it seemed to just really drop the graphical fidelity right down. And I don't know if it was a glitch or it was the map I was playing, but it looked awful. So I actually went back down. I can't believe I'm saying back down to 60 frames a second and got all of that graphical fidelity back. And that was kind of a sweet spot. So I guess for me personally, if 120 frames a second does actually compromise, some of the nicer side of the graphics, textures and stuff like that, then actually I would compromise and stick with kind of the middle ground on 60 frames a second. But Pux, what's your take?
Sorry, Matt's just come back to you to say that he doesn't mean performance. He is referring to how the game actually plays.
Oh, okay.
Not just performance of the game in general. I mean, my kind of instant answer to this is definitely gameplay. But again, I discussed this with my partner actually the other day. And we kind of both had a brief chat about that. And we both said gameplay, but we said only to an extent because mainly especially in the indie scene, you see a lot, especially now, there's a lot of pixel art games which exist. And yes, there's a lot of them which are really good. And of course, as a small team, pixel art is the easiest and the quickest to create. So I can appreciate it from that side. But in terms of pixel art style games, for example, I mean, for me, there's a level of oversaturation of the market for that type of graphical looking game. So when I see certain artwork and then I see it's pixel art, there's part of me which will dismiss it now. I don't mean to sound disrespectful when I say that to the devs or anything, but the gameplay could be brilliant. But I think that there does have to be a very kind of a fine balance between the two, I'd say. I mean, definitely gameplay first, but I think the graphics do have to kind of meet certain expectations, if that makes sense. And I think if you have too much of something, I think it's quite easy to just overlook something and just not even bother giving it a second chance.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And you know what? This game, Greedfall, that's on the screen, is probably a bloody brilliant example of this. And so I do apologise, Matt. I kind of got that a little bit round my ear roll. I do apologise. But this is graphically, this game looks pretty good. This was on ultra settings, I believe. It's a little bit janky around some of the edges and stuff, but some of the textures are nice. But what let this game down for me, and it's something I could easily live with, but the animations were quite janky. And the control systems were a little bit odd. He'd go from standing still to sort of sprinting, and that sort of sweet spot with the analog stick where you kind of try and find it in the middle where he's just walking and not sprinting everywhere like a lunatic. That's one of the things that kind of let the gameplay of this game down, strangely enough. And I don't know why this is still a thing in this day and age, and perhaps it's a little bit better nowadays. But has everyone else come across this bloody thing where an NPC is walking and you've got to walk with them, but you don't walk at the same pace? What is that?
That is the worst thing ever.
What is that?
That's Rockstar 101.
Yeah, what is that? Because, like you say, you would think, I would assume that the walk speed for the NPC is probably assigned a number. Let's call it 80 out of 100. You'd think that your character would walk at 80 out of 100 with that as well, wouldn't you? But, sometimes they walk it's normally that you walk too fast, isn't it? And you sort of go ahead and you have to keep stopping, waiting for them to catch up. And you always, they're normally having a conversation as well. And your character's normally talking over his shoulder because he's always in front. That drives me nuts. Why do they do that?
So another thing quickly, just to add to that I find strange. I think the most recent game I played when it had it was, I think, the Outriders, like the prologue mission at the very beginning, when you kind of purposely slow down because you think that that's going to happen, but then you may accidentally go quicker, and then the NPC will then match your speed. So you're like almost walking side by side. Do you get what I mean? Yeah. And then they might do a right rather than a left like you expected, and it's just I don't understand it. It's strange.
Well, while we're talking about this sort of thing, the other thing, and Outrider is another good example, is the bloody invisible walls, particularly at the very beginning, because I obviously didn't know what to expect from the game at the very beginning. And things that look like you should be able to jump over, you can't. It's just an invisible wall. And it's like, this is 2021. Have we still got this? But, yeah. So, sorry, Scott. What's your take? Graphics or sort of gameplay?
Yeah, I think I echo what you guys have said. It's obviously gameplay. I think you can go back to it's just something as basic as Tetris, or if you go back to the very first Mario games, gameplay can still hold up this day and age. Well, obviously, regardless of how it looks, or even though it looks however many decades old, it still feels good to play. But it is funny, the question itself, because if we go back to the July showcase that Microsoft had where they showed off Halo Infinite for the first time. Now, you see, I was watching that and I was thinking, Christ, this is Halo. I want this. This is Halo. Yeah. This looks like Halo, feels like Halo. It's just what I want from Halo. And I wasn't really too fixated or bothered about how it looked. I thought it looked good. Obviously, I saw a lot of the things that other people saw, like the pop in and things like that. And obviously, it didn't look like something like The Last of Us. But at the same time, to me, it looked like Halo and it played like Halo. And Halo's never been a game, in my opinion, that's been about its sort of graphics. But then, what was all the discussion around Halo Infinite after that particular demo? No one was talking about how it played or how it looked like it played or anything like that. They were talking about how it looked. So while in my opinion, gameplay is the one, like it obviously is for a lot of people, graphics and how a game looks does obviously mean a lot to a lot of people.
I think we're very forgiving as well, because when I can play Oblivion, I could talk all night teary-eyed about how I absolutely adore Oblivion. But when you actually go back to it and you sort of suffer the janky sort of animations and the waiting for the context menu to pop up because you're not standing on the right pixel and things like that, it does all of a sudden sort of come back to you how janky games can be, particularly in the past.
Yeah, equally though, like, you can have a really fantastic looking game, but if the gameplay's not there, there's you just can't continue. Like, just as a recent example, I went back and some people probably not agree with this, but I'll say it anyway. So I went back to Cyberpunk on PC because they've patched it a lot, and it looks amazing. It's an amazing looking game, but I've had to put it down because it's not enjoyable to play. Like
Yeah,
I've
I
just
agree.
come to the conclusion it's just not an enjoyable game to play. The combat's not very good. It doesn't feel good. It's just not there. And I think probably I think Scott, you're the same. Again, that won't make us many friends. Is Red Dead 2.
Yeah.
Boy,
Which looks
careful,
amazing.
careful.
Uh,
I've got a
some
mute
bad
button
luck
here.
this time.
But if anybody can tell me that is a great playing game, you're wrong. You're totally wrong.
I've got you back there, Luke. Don't let anyone tell you that you can't say that.
You know what? But no, that's a great point. And again, I think you brought it up earlier. That's typical Rockstar, though, isn't it? I mean, I've always struggled with the Grand Theft GTA games because of that. The shooting's always been a bit janky. The controls have never felt natural in the hand. Do you know what I mean? It's like you have to kind of learn it. You can't just pick it up and play it.
Yeah.
I think another good example, before we move on, is Anthem. I think of a game which graphically looked absolutely fantastic, especially in the thrown together E3 demo, as we now know as it was. But then, its gameplay was so poor, at least in the eyes of the consumers and people playing it, to the point where EA have gone back to try and rebuild the whole game from scratch, so to speak, and rejig all the systems, and now they've canned the whole project. So I think it just goes to show that if the gameplay ultimately sucks, people don't care how good the graphics look.
Yeah.
I think that's fair. I mean, if I was to ask you what the best game or if you could name one of the best games of the last generation, which game would come to mind?
You know what? I can answer that because I was playing it yesterday. And for me, and it's going to surprise a lot of people, I was playing God of War. And I was thinking, what makes this game so good, right? And I could not think of it. And then it dawned on me.
Was it the axe?
No, the reason I can't think of why it's of what it's good at is because it's brilliant at everything. Because, I take Luke's point. Let's use Red Dead as the example. Graphically, and the story is brilliant. I absolutely adore that game. And I have to admit that, the gameplay can be a little bit janky at times. But for me, the story and the graphics kind of make up for that. But with God of War, everything is so bloody brilliant that it's actually difficult to point out any one thing that makes it good. And so it's just brilliant in general, if that makes any sort of sense. What would be your game?
Well, I'll let Luke and Pucks answer because I'm all wanting you to say the game that I was thinking.
What's the actual question again? Sorry.
What was the game of the last generation? I guess the last generation, I guess, or maybe say of the last sort of 5 to 10 years.
And why?
Not necessarily why. I'm just curious as to which game would stand out. If someone asks you that question, which game comes to mind?
Oh man, the first one that comes to my mind instinctively is Ghost of Tsushima. I think people might argue that the gameplay it seems a bit slow, but it's one of those things where once you get used to it and you understand the story and how the pacing's told, like the graphical fidelity of the game, marred with what I think is pretty good gameplay and mechanics I think is almost a perfect combination of how a game should be told and played at the same time. I think that game is almost flawless, personally.
Have we just said two? We just said two PlayStation first party games on an Xbox centric podcast.
Focus, but
go on in, Luke. Bring it home.
Luke. Well, I'm going to continue the train. I'm afraid it's going to be. I probably agree with Flap. I mean, in the AAA space, right? Let's caveat it with that. The ones that spring to mind are God of War and The Last of Us Part 2.
It's interesting that you just said that because all those three games that you've mentioned are all bloody gorgeous looking games as well. Unfortunately, I was hoping you would say a different game. And the game that I can't mind, Pucks, to be honest, I expect this to come from you, was something like Breath of the Wild, which is one of arguably the best games in a long time in a lot of people's eyes. But if you ask me, that game looks awful. I know some people will disagree with that because of the art style, but it's not a particularly pretty game. Obviously, it's held back by the Switch's hardware, but that's not what makes that game great. Obviously, how it looks is maybe part of it, but obviously just the gameplay that's involved, the systems that are involved in it, that is what makes that game great, and it's fun to play. And even those games that you guys have mentioned, even though they're obviously gorgeous looking games, they also are. I mean, admittedly, I've not played some of those, but obviously from what you guys have told me, what other people have said, those are obviously just fantastic games to play as well. Yeah, I think Nintendo's maybe a good example of gameplay over graphics. I think Nintendo have something good because their art styles normally lend themselves quite well to lower hardware, where their games look great because they go for a certain style that isn't obviously that ultra realistic style of, say, something like Last of Us. But their games, it's gameplay first, but they've got like a nice, easy on the eyes art style that tends to go alongside them. So they play great and they look nice enough, I think, is maybe how I describe Nintendo games. But I played Bowser's Fury recently, and if you look at that on a 4K TV, it's obviously nice to look at, but you can just tell it's not great. But ultimately, it's a 3D Mario game, so it plays bloody awesome. So it's a fantastic game.
It's a really good question, Matt. So thank you for asking it. And perhaps we haven't nailed it quite as exactly as you meant the question to be asked. But I also think indie games excel in this, because if you think of things like Super Meat Boy, I mean, graphically, it's what it is. But it all comes from the movement and the gameplay and stuff, doesn't it? It needs to feel right. Fez is another one.
Can I quickly, before we move on, sorry, can I just quickly ask Scott a question?
Go for it.
Because I partially take back. I love Ghost of Tsushima, but you are right. Breath of the Wild is definitely one of my, if not my best game of the 2010s. But
yeah,
what you said there about how you think the games graphically are awful. I mean, I know where you're coming from. I don't completely agree. But do you think that if the Switch was capable, the game would be better if it had, quote unquote, more realistic or better looking graphics? Or do you not reckon that the art style kind of excels at telling the story, despite its hardware limitations?
So what I will say is, when I said awful was really a poor choice of word, if that's the word that I said, I still think it looks nice enough. Obviously, I know that's sort of like a backhanded compliment, but no, I don't necessarily think it would have been better with better graphics. Not at all. I think Nintendo are fantastic at doing what they do, which, like I say, the graphics are good enough, but the gameplay is always pretty much stellar in the vast majority of their titles, and that's ultimately why they're good. I don't think Breath of the Wild would have necessarily been a better game. I mean, how could it have been better? It was pretty much a 10 out of 10 for a lot of people, but at the same time, would I prefer to look nicer on a 4K TV? Damn right I would. Like when you play a Switch on a 4K TV, often it's quite jarring, especially if you go from a Series X and you play something. I don't know, even something like Outriders, and obviously it's not the prettiest looking game in the world, but it is a really nice looking game in my opinion. And I think when you compare the two, I think it is quite obvious, but that's not going to take anything away from the game, in my opinion.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. What I find good as well, interesting as well. Sorry to overtake Flap. I just want to finish off here because I think that's about 4K TVs. I think it's a good point regarding the Switch as well, because I'd kind of argue that since the launch of the Switch in 2017, in the 4 years since then, I think the uptake of people buying 4K TVs has probably gone up through the roof. People are now buying 4K TVs because of games consoles, right? PlayStation 5, Series X, or 4K Netflix, whatever they're into. And I'd like to think that now, I know we've got the rumor mill of a Switch Pro and 4K capability, and there's been some technical rumors and stuff like that seen. Mm-hmm. So I'd like to think that hopefully Nintendo are looking at it and thinking, actually, 4K is almost like the future, right? Resolution is what people care about, and I'm hoping that they do something about that.
I'm not. Sorry, go on, Flap.
I was going to say, I would argue that the irony is the 4K is the present. No, it's not the future.
Yeah, well, it is now, but back in 2017, it was still quite new, right? And 1080p. I mean, Nintendo don't necessarily take on brand new trends. I mean, their online infrastructure is pretty abysmal in comparison to the offerings of other parties. But yeah, I think I do know what you're saying, Scott. I do agree as well. I mean, I did it earlier this afternoon, actually, going from playing a game on the Series X at 4K to playing, I think it was Monster Hunter Rise demo at, I think, 900p, whatever it ran at. It was you definitely see the difference.
Yeah, I think that's the thing, especially when games are run at sub 1080 as well. And look, I'm not the type of person that's going to say like, oh, it needs to be 4K. It needs to be 4K. I don't care too much about resolution at all. But I think when you compare something like a game on a Series X to a game on Switch, and obviously these are two pieces of vastly different hardware that do different things, and one's much older than the other. But like, it is very apparent that you're playing on much older hardware when you switch across. And yeah, you're right. Some of the rumor mill. Some things in the rumor mill have talked about how it's going to potentially use DLSS to upscale to 4K and stuff, and it'll just make things look a little nicer. So if they look a little nicer and continue to play great, then I think everyone's a winner.
Yeah, definitely.
Absolutely.
Sorry, Flap, I didn't mean to derail.
No, that's fine. I quite like these little side topics and stuff, and it is quite interesting to, because both consoles, I do agree that obviously the Switch and the Series X, different beasts, but they should both be capable of very, very good gameplay. Graphically, that can change, as we know, and they are different. But obviously, bringing it back to the original question, there's no excuse for poor gameplay, really. Graphics should come probably as a second in lots of regards, but... let's move on to, blimey, where are we? Topic 2. Wow, we're only on topic 2. This was a topic that I kind of borrowed from Stubbs Gaming Midweek Podcast a couple of weeks ago. It was a great question, and he asked it on the back of the Days Gone dev that, I'm going to say threw his toys out the pram a little bit, and I can kind of understand why to a certain degree. I think he took it out on the wrong people, but the fact that Sony had kind of declined the Days Gone 2, the sequel, based on the Metacritic scores and stuff like that, and he was not happy about it, and kind of took it out on the gaming public for not buying the game and supporting it first time around and things like that, which I get. But that discussion led into sort of Metacritic itself and the validity of Metacritic and stuff. And yeah, I thought it was a really good topic, actually. I thought it was one we could bring to the show. And we'll come to you again first, Luke, if that's all right. But it feels to me like Metacritic is kind of coming to the end of its purpose or purposeness, if that makes any sense. Have you ever listened or read a review on Metacritic and used that as a metric to go and buy a game? Is Metacritic's days numbered, do you think? Have we all kind of moved on from that since, in this coming generation?
It's a good question. And the answer, I mean, on a personal level, I always do look at Metacritic just to get a feel for, where a game might land.
Has that ever influenced your decision, though?
To some extent in the past, yeah, not as much recently. It's heavily caveated by this, which is that I think Metacritic will always be useful in the sense of it's meant to be a tool for consumers, like general consumers, right? To be able to say, I'm interested in X, what do other people think about it? And obviously Metacritic have, an aggregation of critic scores and the user scores. The user scores, I think, are probably the most useless ones because you can just put, whatever you like. You can, we've seen games being user score, review bombed, etc. It's a much harder process to put more, a lot more stock in that area. But I think the difficulty is that you can't. There's no way of knowing from Metacritic whether you will like a game or not, right? A case in point that we've just discussed, stuff like Red Dead 2, right, which reviewed exceptionally well. I think it's probably got over a 90 average. Do I think it's a 9 out of 10 game? Absolutely not. Having played it, I don't think it is at all. And it comes back to games. I remember, for example, I bought Fallout 4 on the basis of its Metacritic score because I looked at it and it did really well. And I stupidly did that, even though I didn't enjoy Fallout 3. I'm not a big Fallout fan. And then I played Fallout 4 and I didn't enjoy it. It's a useful guiding tool, I think, for some people. I don't think for everyone. I think other people will just look at a game and they will look at gameplay and, they'll make a decision based on that, and they know themselves better than what an average score on Metacritic will. I think the better things to do if you value looking at how a game is before launch is, obviously keeping up to date with media and stuff like that. But the better way to do it is to find a reviewer that's has your taste in games, right? And then it's much easier from that base to actually think, okay, maybe I'll, it's more likely I'll enjoy this game. It's not a guarantee, right? So like for me, for example, a reviewer that our tastes tend to align, and so I put more stock in his reviews than anybody else's is Skill Up. And that's not always the case, but it's a good kind of aggregation for me in terms of whether I might like a game or not. I like I said, I don't think Metacritic is going anywhere, and I don't think it's useless. I just think that it's it's as useful as you want it to be. If you don't want to take any stock, then you don't have to take any stock in it. Now, obviously, I think companies, the bigger difficulty is to some extent that a lot of publishers, and Sony are one of these. I think who else? I think Bethesda were in the past, and I'm sure others were. Tied compensation for their employees in terms of bonuses, etc., to Metacritic scores. And I think it was Obsidian when they did New Vegas. Famously, dropped. They were like a point under a kind of a bonus trigger from Bethesda or some sort of extra finance, and because they didn't get that, because they were literally a point in aggregation under, they missed out. So it's stuff like that I don't really think that Metacritic should be used for, right? Because ultimately it's supposed to be a consumer-facing site. It's not supposed to inform your business decisions or, whether a sequel's greenlit or anything. Because surely, and I mean, Days Gone's a really weird one because that, I think it was in the 70s on Metacritic, right? And I played that game. I loved that game. But commercially, it did actually quite well. So for Sony to apparently turn around and go, no, we don't want to make it because it didn't really do as well critically as we would have liked, is weird. Like, it's kind of strange.
And it was quite publicly demonstrated as well. I mean, this wasn't a rumor of a rumor, was it? The dev did actually kind of come out and was quite vocal about it.
So I don't. It's Metacritic as a whole. I don't think it's useless. I think it just depends on if you want to put any stock in it or not. And I think the better way, if you want an opinion of anyone to inform your view on a game, you should find someone who shares a similar taste in games, and go from there. That's the bet. That's always been the best way. And your own judgment, which is better than any reviewer out there.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And on paper, it seems like a brilliant tool, doesn't it? Like you said, it's kind of hive mind, crowd-sourced reviews and opinions, and you'd tend to assume that, when you take the extremes out of the equation, the average of what's left is kind of what most people feel about it, I guess. Scott, have you ever actually how do you use Metacritic? Is it something there that you actually use as an active tool? And I've also got another slight spin on it. Do you think services like Game Pass are actually going to start skewing things like Metacritic scores and stuff like that? Because obviously, if some of these games are, again, in inverted commas, free, does that actually make people feel a little more willing to perhaps be less harsh on these games?
That second question is actually a really interesting point, Flap. But personally speaking, I don't think I've ever used Metacritic to make a purchasing decision myself. It's been a long time since I've used review scores. I think, maybe when I was a little bit younger, I used to read things like OXM and I'm trying to think, what was the big Edge? Was Edge the big gaming magazine in the UK? I think.
Still is.
It's quite a highbrow one, wasn't it?
Yeah, I used to read those magazines, and maybe those would influence my decision. But this was in the days before YouTube, before gaming podcasts were much of a thing like they are now. I can safely say that for a long, long time, especially since I've become a little bit more financially independent, where, when I was younger, obviously, I maybe got 1 game or 2 games a year. So I had to pick that bloody game wisely, because obviously it wasn't my money I'll spend. It was, it was something I wanted, a new game for my birthday or Christmas or something, as a kid. And maybe I had to try to make sure that game that I got was good. But now, these days, maybe being a little bit more financially independent, I don't necessarily have that worry if I can more or less get the games that I want to get when I want to get them. But I think for a lot of people, and maybe parents, particularly parents who are buying games for the kids that don't necessarily, I guess, involve themselves in the gaming industry, like obviously we do, and people in chat. I think Metacritic and similar tools, OpenCritic's another one, offer, maybe some sort of value to help, maybe justify purchase and decisions for people who are maybe less informed. I think Luke gives some fantastic advice there, and I'd just like to echo that, because I don't think it's wise looking just at any old review. Red Dead Redemption 2 is a fantastic example, that Luke mentioned as well, that when someone's going to review the game, they're not going to pick somebody who hates that genre of game to review that game. Then they're not going to pick somebody who loves first-person shooters but hates 3D platformers to go and review Ratchet and Clank. And on the flip side, they're not going to have someone who hates first-person shooters go and review the next Doom or the next Halo, because, well, what's the point in that? So if you're just looking at any old review, you've got no idea what that reviewer's tastes are like, what they like in a game, what they don't like in a game, and how they align to yourself. So yeah, just really want to echo Luke's advice there. I think just in general though, reviews, I think the main issue I've got with reviews, and this isn't an issue with Metacritic, to be fair, is the idea that anything that doesn't score above 8 out of 10 or 80 out of 100 is somehow not a good game. And I think there's been a really, really good recent example of this, and you guys might have seen it, but Jeff Grubb, he recently gave Returnal a 3 out of 5. 3 out of 5 on their scale, and he's been absolutely bloody hammered for it. It's been called anti-Sony, he's been called an Xbot because he gave Returnal, and he was like, look, I like the game. He's like, I really like the game. There's just issues that it has, which, if you read the content of a couple of these reviews, a lot of reviewers are saying the same thing. They've just given them different scores. But this idea that somehow something that scores a 3 out of 5 means it's a bad game, or that's a bad score, is absolutely outrageous. And we are in this world where 9 or 10 is fantastic and everything else is more or less don't bother with it. And I think that's a really, really bad place to be. A 6 out of 10 or a 7 out of 10 can be a good game. A 10 out of 10 should be an absolute masterpiece that very rarely comes along, in my opinion. But that isn't the way that reviews are seen these days. Like, as Luke mentioned, Days Gone was in the 70s, and that was somehow seen as doing bad. 7 out of 10 is surely good. At least in my opinion. I know the world doesn't seem to see it that way at this moment in time. But then to go on to your point about Game Pass, Flap, I think I would hope that it doesn't influence people's decision, if I'm being perfectly honest, because as a reviewer, I would expect you can't make assumptions about how that the person who's going to be consuming your review is going to be acquiring that game, whether they're going to be spending 50, 60, 70 quid on it, whether they're going to be playing it via Game Pass, or whether it's on sale. Your review really should be based on sort of the merit of the game, but obviously value does form a part of that as well. So it is sort of a balancing act, but I don't think it should. But I think Outriders is an example of where I think it has. I think Outriders scored higher than maybe it would have because it was in Game Pass. I think because it was in Game Pass, I think even myself included, I could excuse some of the issues that I'd had at launch because I didn't pay for it outright in the same way. If I just paid 60 quid for it, I would have been a little bit more vocal, I imagined, about the issues that I have, because I've just spent 60 quid on a game. And I think as game prices come up, I don't want to jump on Returnal too much, but there is a genuine conversation about 70 quid for a game, and you can't, Christ, that's so much money. I've never paid that much for a game ever in my life. But you've really got to consider is is this game worth that 70 quid? And for a lot of people, and myself included, 70 quid is a lot of money. So you've got to, try and make sure that that is a wise purchase and decision, and things like reviews can certainly help with that.
It's interesting, yeah. I mean, obviously, we brought the point up at the beginning, but it's interesting how the cost of a game is kind of pivotal to your opinion of it. Because if you was given a game for free and it wasn't brilliant in all areas, then you'd obviously be more forgiving of it. But like you say, if you're parting with the best part of £70, but not only are you parting with £70, you're also perhaps choosing one game over another because you can't afford two games and stuff. And so that game absolutely has to be everything you want it to be plus more in lots of regards. So that is quite interesting how that's a pivotal point when it comes to opinions like that. And I'm not always sure, and perhaps it's done subconsciously, and I know some people mention it, but when it comes to review, it makes me wonder if that's actually ever taken into account when it comes to professional reviews and things like that. Huxley, do you think Metacritic is perhaps a little bit vulnerable from, obviously review bombing? We know that's a thing on the sort of the public side of things, but when it actually comes to games reviews, we've had quite a few controversial scores go out there. Do you think this is quite a cheap way for journalists to make a name for themselves one way or the other? Click can be a little bit clickbaity and unfortunately drag some scores down that necessarily shouldn't have been?
I'd like to think that well, I wouldn't like to think it, but I can imagine that may be the case with certain publications, especially if, because controversy makes people talk, right, and it puts attention to you. Whether it's, they always say that, bad publicity is good publicity, so to speak. Like if you're in the public eye, everyone's going to talk about you, and that's a good thing no matter what it is. I mean, I've seen a number of things in the chat, actually. I think it's important to mirror that, yes, Metacritic itself is just an aggregate site. I don't think they do reviews themselves, do they? It's just a collection of all the different reviews for a game that's been done by all the various publications as well as the main user scores. I mean, I definitely think it's useful 100% to see what the general public is, what the general reviewer base is saying about a particular game. I mean, if everything is coming up great, then you could argue that, well, as I'm talking, I'm kind of second guessing myself, because I think there's been a number of titles where by reviews, they're put across very positively, especially games that have such a lot of hype behind them. And then equally, there's a lot of people that then, general consumers that then play these games and go, this isn't quite as good as what I expected based on the reviews that I've read and trusted on. So it's one of those things where in definitely recent years, I myself have become, I don't want to say less trusting, but I can't think of any other word for it, but less believable of certain reviews, to a point where if I keep thinking about the game, no matter what the reviews say, and I think, I really want to try this game, that might be enough for me to go, actually, I'm going to go buy this game, because I just have this itch in my body somewhere that I can't scratch until I've played this thing myself, and I can then give it my own.
Let's throw an example at you then, and this is one that you brought up earlier, and it's a brand new IP. So let's use Ghost of Tsushima as an example. So you quoted that as your game of last generation. We're fine. It's a new IP, so you came with no preconceptions about it. It's not a Zelda game that you know and love. It was something new. What led you to go and spend money on that?
That's actually a good one. So the game had actually already come out at this point. I bought it late July. And I think it came out late June, if I remember correctly, last year. So I hadn't really actually heard much of the game, even after it released. But there was all this buzz on YouTube. I know people kind of like to dump on like sites like IGN and other ones like that. But I do subscribe to them on YouTube, I'm not ashamed to admit. And I do enjoy watching some of the content that's on there. And IGN and a load of other streamers and other people on YouTube were absolutely blowing this game up, saying it's absolutely fantastic, one of the best new IPs ever. And because it was in the middle of lockdown and I was working from home at the time, not much else to do kind of thing, I actually ended up buying it on a whim. It's quite rare for me to do so, but I actually threw down that 60 quid like it was nothing. It was almost like this game, it felt right, if you know what I mean. I looked at some, like, I don't know, maybe 15 minutes worth of gameplay and just listening, watching on YouTube and reading all of everyone on different websites saying what they thought about it. And I ended up just bought it on a whim. And I played it I don't know, I gave it about half an hour or even like 15 minutes in, and I was just absolutely blown away by it. And it just drew me in completely. And it's a weird example, as I say, because it was on a whim. So it was, I could have quite easily have not have bought it if I hadn't have known what I know now, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's interesting. And did Metacritic come into that at all?
No, not at all, actually. But I suppose the inverse side of it, though, a game which I think did affect me a bit in terms of the general reviews and things like Metacritic was actually The Last of Us Part 2. I'm not one of those people that didn't buy it because of the controversy and the storyline, all this kind of stuff. I know a lot of people dumped on the game from a few kind of potentially moot points, but overall, like people like Luke that have played the game absolutely love it, and I think it's like Luke's game of the decade, I believe, or it was one of them, if I remember correctly. But that's a game where I've watched the gameplay for it online. I quite enjoyed watching it, but I don't know, I've kind of saw enough negative press about it to the point it made me question whether or not it was worth it. But then I watched the gameplay and enjoyed watching people play it online, but I kind of felt like I got my fix from it from that, if that makes sense. So I wasn't too enamored with, I need to play this myself, if that makes sense. I was actually quite content with just watching it to see what it was roughly about, and I was happy enough with that. I mean, but because I've done that, I don't then put myself in a position where I feel like I have played it and I then give my own opinions on it because I haven't played it myself, so I don't feel like I've got the right to. But at the very least, I think, at least having watched most of the game be played, I feel comfortable enough to at least give a top-level opinion on what I thought of what I saw. Because there's definitely a difference, I think we'd all agree, that watching someone play a game and enjoying watching it is different to actually playing it yourself. I mean, like, for example, I mean, I don't have a PS5, so I won't be playing Ratchet and Clank at launch. I'm definitely going to be watching gameplay online, but I still know that watching it is going to be nowhere near as good as actually holding that controller and controlling the character myself, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I'm in the same boat with Ratchet and Clank. Yeah, it looks fantastic, and it's definitely a game I think I would enjoy. But that's an interesting point. Luke, perhaps we'll just come back to you, and I know we've got a little bit of chat. We'll finish off with you in a sec, Pucks. But Luke, what do you think game platform holders should use as their metric to decide whether a game should be greenlit for a sequel or not?
I think it has to be the sales, right? I think, ultimately it comes down to brass tacks, doesn't it? It comes down to how much money has that game made, as against its development budget and their expectations for it in terms of sales. So, that should be the only basis on which a game's being brought, because there are games that, Days Gone being one of them, for example, where the Metacritic score was very out of line with general consumer consensus on that game. Sold very well. People loved it. Not to say that there weren't issues with it, but for example, if Sony had have turned around at the beginning, in the first Uncharted and gone, well, Metacritic's not great on this, which it wasn't. It wasn't fantastic. It was decent for a Naughty Dog game. And if they'd have turned around and gone, you know what, no, we're not going to greenlight Uncharted 2, like, with the benefit of hindsight, a bad decision would that have been? I think, I don't think Metacritic, being what it is, being an aggregation of many people's opinions, because that's all, gaming websites are. They're just opinions on a game, and you don't have to like those opinions, you don't have to agree with them. But when platform holders or publishers are taking stock in them, I think that's a bit strange, because if the game's doing well, if it's sold well, then what should it matter? Do you know what I mean? So, and the converse applies to some extent, right? You had, I know Puck's brought up The Last of Us Part 2, which, had this really weird vocal, I'd definitely say vocal minority of people, non-critics, like, your average Joe, who really didn't like, a particular story choice in the game. And that game has a really high Metacritic score. Critics loved it, and actually, if you look at the Metacritic, if you look at many of the reviews for that game, really that particular thing isn't seen as an issue at all, right? But it was for some people in the general public. But if it The Last of Us 2 sold absolute gangbusters, and if Sony turned around and said, "Well, we're not gonna make the game on the basis of," even though it sold really well, there was a bit of controversy around it, so we're not really that confident we're going to make a sequel out of it. And who knows if they will for other reasons, but that would also be weird. So surely the best metric is just for these guys is just to say, okay, did the game sell well? Is there potential for a sequel to sell well? If yes, then let's go and make it. And sorry, just as another point as well, you have other games, these kind of weirder games that did okay, but that didn't do well in terms of Metacritic. And the ones that spring to mind for me are games like Rise, Son of Rome, right? And The Order, 1886, which did not do well in Metacritic at all, but they were quite well liked. I think, and they also sold pretty decently. Not brilliantly, and sometimes it's kind of frustrating that games like that aren't given a second chance to expand on their concept and bring a new story and bring a new game, and given more of a chance to maybe come to light, because they're just kind of washed away. So it's it's a difficult one, isn't it?
It's strange how games can actually fall by the wayside. And I think Rise is probably a good example. Probably Titanfall 2 is another good example as well. It's an absolutely fantastic game. Both of those I came too late. Both of those I have this fantastic community that we're currently sitting in to thank for them to just persuade me to play those games. And once I'd got into them, it's like, oh my god, these are fantastic games. How did I let these slip past at the time? Yeah. Well, perhaps Titanfall's a little bit easier to answer, but yeah, even Rise, I was a day oneer with the Xbox One, the original. What was that called? Project Scorpio? Or was that Scarlet? I can't remember. Scorpio, I think. Yeah, got one of those, and like I say, I never picked up Rise, even though it was probably the best looking game at the launch of the Xbox One. It wasn't until it was in Game Pass, I think a little bit later, that I played it. It's like, oh my god, this is fantastic. I absolutely love this. But yeah, it's a little bit sad when games can get overlooked like that, and I guess it is because of the, like you say, the aggregate of opinions at the time. And I know Rise had a little bit of a troubled beginning, particularly around the sort of the Kinect and it being on Xbox One and the whole resolution wars and stuff like that. But it's strange how it does affect the sort of the gaming psyche, and that you sort of through osmosis sort of take that on board, and at some point in the future realise you probably shouldn't, and you might have been wrong. But it's interesting. Very interesting. Pucks, where are we on the chat, my friend?
Yeah, that's right. I've got a few comments here. Some from Indie Gamer. So first one here, which I've said already, Indie Gamer says, Metacritic is simply an aggregation of all reviews. Reviews are not the problem. It's how people look at them and how they treat them. Lots of people want to blame Metacritic all of the time, but it's just an archive of all of the reviews. Put your trust in reviewers you know well.
Well, I think that I take that point, but I also think Metacritic is also the sort of the go-to place to find out the people that have either review bombed or given a very medium game a ridiculous score. And there is a part of me that is a little bit cynical and think, are they just trying to make a name for themselves or be a little bit clickbaity? So, Metacritic can kind of bring its, unfortunately, it can be a window that actually feeds those sort of traits, unfortunately, and it's not Metacritic fault itself, it's just the platform that it is. But yeah, no, I do take that point.
Yeah. I've got another comment here from Matt Diet, who says, it's my opinion, not Metacritic, that... Sorry, I'll start again. It's my opinion that Metacritic... It's not Metacritic that is the problem. It's certain reviewers that are paid to lie about certain games these days.
Well, that's something that hasn't cropped up for a little while, is it? There's been some controversy around, sort of some suspect game reviews and stuff like that. I guess that seems to be more of a thing of the past, particularly if you're talking about things like IGN. I guess, well, that's how it certainly seems to me. Unless the panel have heard anything recently of some shambolic review scores and paid for reviews. Is that still a thing that exists? Do you think, Luke and Scott, or do you think the sort of the game reviewing industry's cleaned up its act a bit?
did it ever exist?
Well,
Yeah, I think
that
it's total conspiracy nonsense,
Yeah,
to be honest.
I'm obviously of the opinion that I think people have bias in their reviews. I don't doubt for a second that doesn't exist, and I'm sure some people have bad reviews. Like there are reviews that I've read in the past where I've looked at and I said, "Did you actually play this game, or did you just sort of play for 20 minutes?" You know, but I don't think I believe for 1 second that a company has ever gone to somebody and said, "Right, here's a check for X, please give this score 90 or above."
there was the IGN employee that was trying to blow the whistle on some shady tactics. Now, whether that was it was a disgruntled employee, and whether they were accurate and correct or not, I don't know. But these accusations have been made at these sort of companies, haven't they?
Yeah, I know the accusations have been made, and to be honest, I suspect that there may be some developers who've maybe tried it in the past, but I think any reviewer that's worth his salt would very politely, at the very least, decline such an offer if they've got sort of any journalistic integrity at all. So I don't think that exists these days, but like I say, I don't think it's really been a thing in the past either. But yeah, if anyone has anything that proves otherwise, then I would love to read it.
Yeah, I think the problem as well is that people who go to Metacritic, be it Average Joe, you, me, anybody, we all have our biases as well, right? When we go to that site, so sometimes you're looking for stuff that's not there, as in, you're looking for, and like this is not something that I do or that perhaps any of us do, but there are really big fanboy people out there who will, accuse reviewers of not just a bias, because as Scott says, like, every reviewer has a bias in some way, right? They have a particular perspective that means they're perhaps more inclined or adverse to give a game a score, on a differing scale. But a lot of people, or some people, will look at those reviews and just say, "Oh, well, they're bought off," or someone's paid for it, or something like that. When it's not that at all. Like it's just conspiracy nonsense, and it's just kind of people looking for something as fuel, to say that they're right or someone else is wrong. So, and I really don't like it. I just think it's it's so unsubstantiated, that it's just total nonsense. And like the Jeff Grubb one's like a really good example, right? Where and people are. I mean, despite the fact to give it a 3 out of 5, which is actually a good score, people saying he's a shill for Xbox or stuff like that because he gave a game a good score, and he has criticisms. Look, I've played. I absolutely love Returnal. I think it's fantastic, and I don't agree with Jeff Grubb's assessment of it. But I can absolutely see why he said that, right? You can read that and go, oh, okay, that's fair enough, because I'm a measured, normal person when I come to reviews, and I'm not looking at it from a, Returnal's a PlayStation game. It's the best thing that's ever existed. So like, you cannot possibly not give it at least a 9 out of 10. It's just a review. It's just someone's opinion, right? He's not a shill. He's not being paid or hates PlayStation, and the same goes for when PlayStation games or Xbox games or any Nintendo games get really high scores, right? It's not because anybody has an inherent, they've been paid off to do so. It's because they've played the game and they think it's that score. And as long as the review is competent, as long as it goes into detail as to why that score for them is justified, then it's absolutely fine. It's absolutely fine. And if you sat there and you're saying, "Oh, well, no, this game's been bought off, these reviews have been bought off," you're talking nonsense. Like, you need to go and have a lie down.
I'd also say, like, what would be the point in these companies paying people to give a game a high score when people do that for free already? mentioned, there is so much bias. You can go to any YouTube channel, any website, any Twitter account that has a bias, and this is on all sides of the coin as well. This isn't just PlayStation. This isn't just Xbox. You'll see them, and they'll defend that game to the death simply because it's exclusive to PlayStation or exclusive to Xbox, or they'll attack it because of for the same reasons. And those websites or those blogs or those Twitter accounts, they'll offer a review and they'll say something, and they'll have that inherent bias behind it. So why would Sony and Microsoft pay for it when people are giving them it for free at the moment anyway? And sort of these console fanboy wars that are constantly going on. There's no reason for them to pay for it whatsoever.
Yeah, no, I do completely agree. I saw Jeff Grubb's kind of synopsis of the game before the embargo, and you could kind of tell that it probably wasn't for him. But that's fine, like you say, the different strokes for different folks and stuff. Hansverse Senior in the comments has said Metacritic should remove the user average score. I agree, and I think that feeds into what you were saying, Scott. Obviously review bombs and stuff, and perhaps I think perhaps one of the problems with Metacritic is it can be used as a tool to fuel the console war, as it were. And if it were just professional reviewers and that's it, then that would probably be a lot better in certain regards. But because you can review bomb a game, it does. I think it loses. People lose faith in that kind of, in that sort of hive mind thing, because, like you say, it can actually be manipulated, unfortunately. But well, this is quite a topic, isn't it? Fantastic. Well, is there anything else we need to add, Puxley? Is there anything else in the chat?
The only other one I really had saved was another one from Matt Dart, who says, "Pux, you are more skeptical of reviews." Which I think, in recent years I kind of have been, but I think, as I've already said, like, if I look at a game and I know I like it, I'm going to be buying it no matter what, kind of thing. I think there's game. I know we had this chat a few weeks ago on talking about Returnal, actually, before it came out, based on the some of the gameplay videos. I think at the time I actually mentioned that I wasn't actually completely sold on the game, and you all absolutely berated me for it. But to be fair, even now, I appreciate, like, Luke's got the game, he loves it, it's great. I've seen great things about it online, but I just look at the game and it, it looks good as a shooter, but it's just something about the game. I don't know what it is. I can't put my finger on it, but there's something I'm not sold by, to the point where I wouldn't be rushing to the shops to buy it.
Perhaps it's because you got to part with 70 quid to get it. That might help. Or not.
Yeah, it could be that. I don't know if it feels like it is that, because games like Ratchet and Clank, like, the game could end up being absolutely terrible in terms of how it plays, performs, or the story. But I know that I'm not even going to be looking at any review, assuming I had a PS5, of course. I wouldn't even looking at any reviews. I'm straight. My 70 quid's being dropped immediately on release for a game like that, just because of how I feel about the franchise, how I like it. So there's a mixture of things at play, I think, when it comes to people's decisions on what they buy and how they feel about it, if that makes sense. I think there's a lot of instinct and how you just generally feel about something that you can't really describe. I mean, I know we've had this nice discussion about reviews and how we do or don't use it to buy stuff, but I think ultimately there is that level. Each person has that level of, I just like the look of this game, to the point of I don't even care what reviews say. Do you disagree with that, anyone? Like, surely there's a game you've gone, you know what? I like this game so much that I don't even care what reviews say. I'm going to buy it and enjoy it, even if it's got a 3 out of 10.
That's the thing, that should be how you feel about every game, in my opinion. Why should a review score influence your enjoyment of the game? And I think part of the problem is people look to reviews as like confirmation that they made the right decision, rather than just buying the game, enjoying it, making your own mind up. What they want is then for other people to make them feel good about that choice or that purchase. That what you just said there, Pucks, that's how you should feel about every game. If you like the game, you like the game. It doesn't matter whether it got, I mean, Balan Wonderworld accepted, because that game looked bloody awful. But obviously I'm just messing there. But you know what I mean? Every game that you play, if you like the game, it doesn't matter what other people say about the game.
I appreciate that.
Just, you play it. What you mentioned there about Returnal, Pucks. I think one thing that I think should be made very clear to people is what you just said about Returnal there. That's absolutely fine. It's good. Luke loves the game. You're not sold on it. Other people aren't sold on it. That's fine. Everyone has different opinions on bloody everything in life, and that's okay. And it should be okay.
And,
I just think that. Oh, sorry, go on, Luke. Go on.
no, go on, Puck. So it's okay.
I was just going to quickly say that, I completely agree with everything you say, but the reason I brought that up, though, is because, and I'm seeing it in the chat as well, I think because, as hardcore gaming fans, we see reviews all the time to the point where I think that there are a lot of people out there who are wrongly, potentially, swayed by negative reviews. They might absolutely love the game, but because the public opinion is that this game sucks, they're not even going to bother trying it, when actually, if you feel instinctively that you like the game, just buy it, man. Like, if you can afford it, just go for it and enjoy it. But I'm bringing this up because I just feel that there's lots of people who don't do that anymore, or feel like they can't do that. But as you just said rightly there, Scott, definitely everybody should just buy whatever they want and enjoy it, no matter what the public or the media have to say about it.
I think there's an element of sort of tribalism here coming in as well. Red team versus blue team kind of thing. And like you say, people like to feel part of a crowd, and if everyone's slating a game, then they kind of jump on the bandwagon a little bit, and if everyone loves a game, again, jump on the bandwagon a little bit. And I think it takes quite a clear mind, and true gamers as well, to people that don't get involved in the console wars, to actually be free enough to think, actually, everyone loves this game, but it's not my cup of tea, and that's absolutely fine, or vice versa. There might be people out there that think Balan Wonderworld is probably the game of the generation, and they'd be crazy to think that, but if they did, that's absolutely fine.
No one thinks that, Flap. No one thinks that.
Well, you never know. But the other thing is, people are very binary. And, I talk about people as if I'm not a person. Perhaps I'm binary as well, but I think it certainly feeds into the console wars where you are binary.
Yeah.
7 out of 10, what does that mean? Does that mean it's great, or does it mean it's crap? Because people will just want to know, is it fantastic? Is it crap? And
that's true.
And that's how they sort of shrink their opinions down into some of these game reviews. And like you say, 3 out of 5, Luke was saying, is a good score. I would argue that lots of people would say that's not a good score. It's only because it's not a 5 out of 5. If you see what I mean, some people, not all, and like I say, probably the people that buy into the console wars more so. But their view on this kind of stuff is very binary, and it's either crap or it's not. And it's an interesting one because, like you say, when you're subtly putting 7 out of 10, and some magazines back in the day were doing it out of 100. No, you'd have like 87 out of 100, and you think, cracky, that's quite a specific number, isn't it?
Yeah. I think the difficulty is as well is that for the last few years we've all been conditioned through a lot of critic scores and then kind of reception in the gaming communities, etc. We've all been conditioned on a 10-point scale is not a full scale anymore, right? It's so a 5 does not mean an average on that scale, or at least people would have you believe that it means it's irredeemable garbage, right? when in fact there's very few websites now that actually use a full scale. One of the very few magazines, the ones that are left that do. Edge, actually, which Scott mentioned earlier, are one of the only ones that I've seen that use a full scale. So when they give a game a 6 out of 10, people are like, "Oh, that's a terrible score," 6 out, and it's like, no, it's not. It's above average, right? Yeah. And Edge say it's above average. It's a decent game, right? But there's just this thing. I remember specifically, like I remember this in the community and happening at the time when I think Gears 5 scored was it kind of mid-80s, low 80s or something like that as a Metacritic. And, there were some people that were saying, "Oh, it's not good enough." It's like, well, that's a really good score. Like even on a non-full scale score, that's really good. And I think the problem is that people have this. We're all guilty of it, and it but it does annoy me is that we all look at a game, and we play it, and sometimes we don't play it, and we try and justify our opinions to other people, in a way that makes it seem like we're stating facts, right? So the big one of this is like, and Returnal is a good recent example of it, which is where a lot of people look at it and go, "Well, that's not worth £70." And it's like, well, it's a subjective value assessment. What, you know what I mean? Like, to you, fair enough, it's not worth £70. I get that, but that doesn't mean the game might not be worth £70 to someone else. And it's the same when you look at different scores. Some people look at a 7 out of 10 and go, "Well, that's a garbage game, isn't it?" And it's other people look at that and go, no, that's a good score. So ultimately, I think everybody just has to kind of tone the rhetoric back a little bit with all this stuff and just realize that everybody has different preferences. And the only person that can look at any game, and give for you and give it an honest view and think whether it's for you or not is you, right? You can only make that assessment yourself. Reviews might be a good thing to do that. They might not be. Don't let anybody influence your decision, and you can justify your decision on any basis you want because it's your money at the end of the day, and you're the one buying the game, and you're who thinks it might be good or not. So
let's put it to the litmus test. Let's round it off with a litmus test, shall we? And this applies to everyone in the chat as well. And let's just fly through this very quickly. Luke, we'll come to you first. What was the last game that you paid actual money for, and I guess, and I don't mean on Game Pass, that you were really disappointed with?
Watch Dogs Legion.
Okay, Pucks?
Oh man, I don't know if I have one.
No, that's fine. Scott?
Yeah, I'm like Puck said. Genuinely, nothing comes to mind.
Can I tell you, the only game, this is going to sound really stupid and bizarre, but the only game that does come to mind of one game I really regretted buying was Excite Trucks back on the Wii.
Jesus.
I know. I think it's one of the only games I remember buying when I actually regretted the purchase. I know that sounds bizarre because it's so long ago and it's such a specific title of a very niche genre, but yeah.
So I guess that demonstrates that whatever it is we use as our metric of whether we're going to like a game and whether it's good or not actually works, doesn't it? Because apart from Luke, and I get Watch Dogs Legions. That's a fair one. And to be fair, Luke, you buy quite a lot of games. Pong Souls just said Anthem. But that's not a new game by any stretch, is it? So it's a game that's probably from a few years ago. So I guess my point is, it doesn't happen that frequently. So whatever metric it is we use as gamers, it kind of works, doesn't it? I guess so. Reviews. I'm quite pleased that people just use reviews as kind of just the opinion pieces that they are, and that we actually obviously use a lot more than that. And like you say, friends are quite a big influence for me. If people are really raving about stuff, and you sort of think, well, I'm going to have to give it a go because I obviously trust friends. I know they're not getting paid by anyone to give me a great review of this game, and I know they're not going to review bomb it and get any kind of kudos out of me for it. So that's always a big one as well. Yeah. Wow, what a topic.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Can I just add one final point, Flap, if that's okay? Because I think there's a couple of things that I didn't have a chance to mention before, and this kind of takes back to one of the questions you asked me. I think it was at the beginning of this topic. I think so. Was the value of Game Pass in this conversation? We talked about it from a review perspective, but Game Pass from just a consumer's point of view also allows you to simply play the games that you think look good and make that decision. If you don't like it, just bloody delete it off your console. There's so much less risk with Game Pass. But the second point I'd like to make is just how maybe something that we've had in the past that doesn't exist so much these days that I think would probably be good. And I think Outriders is a good example of this, that I think maybe we should get a little bit more things like demos. In the past, you would get a demo disc that would allow you to play the game, and you would physically be able to play the game to help make that decision. And demos aren't something that come across very often, but Outriders is a game that I pre-ordered because of the beta it wasn't the beta, there was actually a demo that they released for that game, and that sort of confirmed sort of my decision that I wanted to buy that game because I actually got an opportunity to play it. And demos aren't something that you come across too often these days from what I've seen. But also, if you purchase digitally, you often get sort of refund policies on some platforms. I think Xbox allows you to refund anything as long as you haven't played it for more than 2 hours, I think, up to 2 weeks after you've purchased it, which obviously isn't an awful lot of time, but at least that does help mitigate some of that risk. If you find out within that first hour that, Jesus Christ, this game is trash, in your opinion, obviously, and you have that opportunity. Red Dead Redemption 2. You have that opportunity to refund it as well. So I think platforms like Xbox and I think Steam seem to be leading the way a little bit from a refund point of view. I know there are some negative aspects to that as well, particularly for short games. I am aware of that, but there are things that developers and publishers could be doing to help us as consumers. And Game Pass is obviously one thing from Microsoft, but things like demos and betas do often help with that as well. Because as I think Pucks alluded to earlier, you can't really make that decision until you play the game, and at that point, generally speaking, you've parted with your money, and then it's ultimately, did you make the right decision? That's after the fact. So
I think demos, the Xbox 360 era was the era of demos for me. I think it tailed off perhaps in the Xbox One era, and certainly now. Perhaps I'm wrong. Correct me if you think I'm wrong, particularly on consoles. But I remember there being lots of demos on the 360, and like you say, it does help you make an informed choice. But
I mean, wasn't
wow.
the PlayStation 1 as well like the era of demo discs?
Yeah, I guess, yeah, absolutely. And perhaps you're right, demo discs and PS2 as well, I guess, to a certain degree. But I guess I meant easy to access, online, day one demos that was coming over. But wow, well, we've got 2 more topics to get through in probably less than half an hour. So let's bang these 2 topics out, shall we, if we can. Chat, thank you very much for being here. It's been absolutely fantastic. I do love the interactivity with the chat. Seen a few new names in the chat tonight. Absolutely love to see that. Get involved. Don't be shy. We're all friendly here. Let's do topic 3 then. And I guess this is kind of a small topic, but apparently there's 50 more FPS boost titles coming fairly soon. Now that's a pretty big chunk of games, isn't it? And we'll come to you first, Scott, if you don't mind. What's your take on FPS boost? Do you take advantage of these games? Do you actually download games that you wouldn't necessarily have downloaded because of the FPS boost?
I've not actually yet to take advantage of it, if I'm being perfectly honest, Flap. I know we obviously trying to play Battlefield a little bit earlier in the week, and you mentioned earlier in the show sort of your experience with that. I don't have a 120 hertz capable TV, so I can't take advantage of those that go from 60 to 120. And I've not really played I haven't played any game that jumps from 30 to 60. So from me, I think it's fantastic. I think the technology behind it is essentially magic in my opinion, but it's just not something that I personally have yet taken advantage of. I'm interested to see this list though, because there may be games in that list that are maybe in my backlog at the moment that maybe at some point, because they get that boost, because I'd always prefer to play a game at 60, that maybe the fact that they jump from 30 to 60, for example, I'll then be more tempted to go and jump into them a little bit quicker. The rumor actually recently, Flap, is that it's actually going to be 70 games that are going to be in there. So I think that came from, I think there's a few people like Colt Eastwood on Twitter have mentioned it's actually going to be 70 games. So I'll be curious to check the list out. I think it's bloody magic what they do, but the likelihood of me taking advantage of it is fairly slim. Actually, that does remind us, I did try one game, which was Prey. When the first list came out, the only, I guess, the main issue I had with that is I didn't play it beforehand, so I didn't know what it felt like at 30. So my first experience of that game was at 60. I thought it felt good. I didn't play it for too long because I got distracted by other things. But I've had really, really limited experience with it so far.
No, fair enough. It's absolutely great to see Microsoft's commitment to this, because I don't know about you, Microsoft probably back in the Xbox One era, they'd come out with bits and bobs and they'd kind of implement it, but it was always a little half-assed, and sometimes things kind of fall by the wayside. And I guess Sony are guilty of that as well to a certain degree. But they really seem to have stuck with this FPS boost, and they're really pushing it. And I can't really imagine that they get a huge amount out of it, other than perhaps goodwill and perhaps people wanting to try these games, and the easiest way to try these games is Game Pass. Perhaps it's another angle for them to sell on Game Pass. But this isn't obviously just a Game Pass focused upgrade, I guess. Luke, have you downloaded anything specific just to try the FPS boost? Any of these 70 games that you think might be landing? Any kind of guesses as to what might be coming?
No, I personally haven't actually tried out the feature at all, but that's mainly because obviously at the moment it's limited in terms of game scope. If there's 70 games coming up, I'm sure there's probably one in there that I'll go and try out. I'd like it to come to, stuff like well, putting aside the EA issue that we talked about in the week, I'd like it to come to something like the Dead Space games, right, which run at 30, and if they could get boosted up to 60, I think that would be nice. Just to play that kind of on the console. So, but I think it's an awesome feature. Like it's a really, really, really good feature, and it's not like it's not like a system seller or anything like that, but it's just a great kind of extra feather to, the Xbox cap, so to speak. That as you say, like, they're probably not getting much out of it apart from the fact that, these games might, get a bit of a reinvigoration in terms of audience because people are willing to try it out. But it's just super cool technology. And I think the more they can bring it, especially to the kind of last gen games, and even further back than that, if you go back to maybe some, more OG Xbox games and stuff like that, that's going to be super cool. So, I hope they keep going with it, which it seems like they will. It's a good push for them at the moment. And I'm sure there will be something in the next batch of games that I'll try out.
No, absolutely. No, that's cool. Chat, let us know if there's any games that you've downloaded specifically to try out the FPS boost. Pucks, have you had a dabble? Is there anything specifically that you've downloaded?
No, there isn't yet, unfortunately. I mean, there
So
was
this
one game
surprises
that
me. I've just done a full sweep, and no one's kind of said that they've really taken. Yeah, but that's a real life scenario, isn't it? So I'm guessing as a percentage, it's not a huge deal in people's psyches. It's just a nice to have, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, so the one game I would still like to try is Fallout 4 because I played it on PS4, which ran console 30 FPS. I very much enjoyed the game, and I've heard that's really fantastic at 60. A friend of mine, when Fallout 4 was the game to play, he had it on PC. Obviously, he was playing at 60 frames. So when I went around his after, say, university or whatever else, just to have a go and then go back to my place and play on PS4, like immediately, I do notice the difference. So to be able to play it on console at 60 is something I would like to do. But, I mean, the one thing that stops me is that if I'm going to download the game, in my mind at least, I want to download it to know that I'm actually going to play it and not just to try it out for 5 minutes, if that makes sense. I know that sounds a bit bizarre, but
so is it more of a case that of the FPS boost games, none of them really take your fancy?
Kind of, yeah. And in terms of what you were saying before, what would I like to see? I don't know. I can't think of anything in particular, but I would be interested to see if they bring the feature to Xbox 360 titles. I think that would be quite cool to see, like older game, especially with like the new Fable, the new Fable that's in development coming out sometime in the future. I'd like to think it'd be quite cool to have FPS boost on, say, Fable 2 and Fable 3 on the 360. I think that'd be quite cool to see how they run, because I think when the game first came out, or when both of them first came out, I believe there was a lot of issues that launched with regards to its frame rate, and I think even it just runs at 30. So I know it's not necessarily the best showcase for it, but I think if you was to go back to playing it on original hardware or even through just standard emulation, and then you activate FPS boost on an older title, I'll be interested to see, one, if they can get it to work, and two, does it look great and feel great? And I'd like to think it would.
Mirror's Edge Catalyst has got FPS boost. I think, was that last gen? I think it was last gen, actually, wasn't it?
Catalyst was, yeah.
Yeah. But that's an
There's
interesting
only
one.
Yeah, there's only a small selection of games that have it at the moment. I think maybe which is part of it why when you're asking us whether we've experienced it, I think there's less than 25 games in there at the moment, and obviously some of those boosts are up to 120, which obviously you need this particular hardware to be able to take advantage of, which again sort of shortens the list of games that actually you have the opportunity to take advantage of that particular feature. So if you don't want to play those games, or you've already played them, it may not be a feature for you. But I think going back to a point that you mentioned earlier, Flap, I think all the games that are in there at the moment are all in Game Pass at the moment, if through either just being part of Game Pass or through EA Play. If I think, because obviously the last batch was a big batch of EA titles, and I believe all of those are available through Game Pass Ultimate. So I think this is actually a push just to make Game Pass better. Game Pass is going to be a home to hundreds and hundreds and probably eventually thousands of games. And having older games play at 60 or in the future at 120 FPS is going to, I think, may allow them to hold up a little better. I think, in 10 years' time, if we try to go back to a game that plays at 30 FPS when 120 FPS is probably standard at that point, I think that would be quite difficult to go back and play. But these games having these features enabled, I think, will allow them to stay more relevant in that service for a longer period of time. I don't know if anyone would agree with that.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And to be honest, lots of people saying, my TV doesn't support 120, and obviously that's a thing. I completely get that. But I know lots of gamers, and a lot of them play on PC monitors. And obviously, there's a hell of a lot more PC monitors out there that do 144, but obviously 120 and stuff like that. And then, to be honest, I play a lot. In fact, I got my Series X hooked up to my monitor. It's a 1440p monitor, does 144 hertz. You might think, well, that's a bit of a waste, you're not getting your full 4K out of it and stuff, but I do play at 120 hertz most of the time on the Series X. And I've actually got my One X under the telly, which can do 4K 120, but I choose not to do it that way around. I don't know why. It's a little bit crazy. I guess I do a lot of my game recording on the Series X. That's why it's near my PC, I suppose. But there are lots more options out there than just having a 4K 120 TV. Like I say, you can do gaming monitors, and a lot of those are pretty damn reasonable as well, price wise, or can be, particularly if they're sort of 1080p ones as well. But yeah, that's quite interesting now. And like I say, a quick sweep kind of suggests that FPS Boost isn't the the killer app, as it were, that perhaps I might have thought it might have been. I guess I'm the same. I guess I trade these out just from sort of being curious about them more than anything else. Most of the games that are on the list I've either played or don't want to play, I guess. But it's interesting to see what other 70 titles might be coming.
I'll say, just to add that, I mean, similar to Scott, I mean, I don't have a 120 hertz TV, and I have no plans of buying one anytime soon. I mean, especially on my main living room TV, which is where I play. For me, it's just not for cost right now. Personally, I mean, I'm quite happy to play games at 60. I know people say once you've seen 120, you don't want to go back, similar to how you went from 60 down to 30. But then 60's always been around. It just hasn't been necessarily reachable as the hardware was progressing through the time. Like PlayStation 1 titles, for example. A lot of them and Dreamcast titles did run at 60 frames.
I would
so
argue,
it's a limitation of the hardware.
Yeah, well, like we said earlier, I'd actually argue that 60 is possibly the sweet spot, because if these consoles are now capable of doing 120, that's absolutely fine, and same for PCs. But a bit like Luke said, what would we rather choose, graphics or performance? Well, I think 60 hertz is probably, 60 frames per second is possibly the sort of sweet spot in lots of cases, particularly for console gaming, because like you say, if they're capable of more, let's have a little bit more graphical kind of clout, but have that silky smooth 60 frames a second as well. Because personally speaking, and again, this is subjective, the leap from 30 to 60 is a huge leap for me. The leap from 60 to 120 isn't as big a leap at all, in my opinion. I'm happy for others to disagree with that. But like I said, the leap from 30 to 60, in my opinion, is huge. Well, this topic went on a little bit longer than I was expecting, to be honest. No, that's pretty cool. Let's just round off quickly with this last one. And this is to do with the huge revenue rises that we've seen in both PlayStation and Xbox. Xbox reportedly up 232%, which is a huge figure. PlayStation up too, although a little bit dismayed by that, because PlayStation's sort of news of revenue growth was a little bit watered down, because I don't think it had quite met the target or anticipated targets that had been set out for them. So it was a little bit watered down a little bit, unfortunately, but it's still a fantastic target. And let's just pose a very quick question to all of you. Obviously both companies have been ploughing lots of money and investing lots of money going forwards, and these profits are always great to see, and it's not a huge surprise at the beginning of the generation. And perhaps let's go to you first, Luke. Let's specify this out. Do you think this money is just going to get ploughed straight back into gaming and building on the platform that they've already got, or do you think this rise in revenue is actually them just sort of reaping what they've already sown coming up into this generation?
Is this for both?
Yeah, sorry, we'll go to you, Luke, on that one. Yeah, for both, yeah.
Yeah. No, I think. Look, there were fantastic results for both Microsoft and Sony. Microsoft continuing, their trajectory of increasing pretty much everything, right? Increasing subscribers. I know they didn't disclose the numbers, but clearly they have. Increasing hardware sales, because I think generally there's a much more interest in their hardware now, because they've committed to that space and they're doing things a lot better. Sony just doing PlayStation things, right? Like, it's just a total juggernaut at this point, and that's kept going even. And the same applies to Microsoft. Even in an environment that isn't particularly conducive to selling many consoles at the moment because of the semiconductor shortage, etc. So they're both doing extremely well. It'll continue. It will only increase as people can get their hands on the machines, because that will not only drive up hardware, but it'll drive up game sales, and it'll drive up subscriptions. And I think, to your point, I think they, there's a lot more money to be earned by them, and I think they will, start investing more money into all facets of their console production, of their first parties. Sony were saying specifically that they were looking to invest 183 million dollars this year just in growing their first parties, in terms of extra staff, etc., making their studios bigger. Microsoft, we've seen, obviously they're very much into making their studios bigger, or rather getting more studios, because they realize that there's not a finite piece of the pie to be had, right? It's a huge market that you can grow into, and that they can continue to make a lot of money from. So it's only going to get bigger from here, and I think they'll both be very, very pleased with how it's going.
No, completely agree, Scott. The future of gaming is pretty bright, isn't it? It's obviously a pastime we're all passionate about. Otherwise, we wouldn't be sat here discussing it like we are. It's great to see these numbers come in, and that actually, these big platform holders can actually start ploughing some of this back in. I know Microsoft have been on a spending spree, but obviously, PlayStation as well got a big chunk of cash that they can start ploughing back into the PlayStation service. I mean, the future for gaming is pretty damn bright at the moment, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And if you don't mind, Flap, I just wanted to maybe just clarify a couple of things that you mentioned at the beginning there. So I think the 232% that you mentioned for Microsoft, that was specifically revenue from hardware sales, rather than anything. And then I think the Sony results that were relating, where maybe they weren't quite as high, I think that was overall Sony Corporation rather than PlayStation. I think it was something where maybe they were going to have to maybe buy back some shares, because maybe there wasn't quite the same level of growth. But I think that was Sony Corp rather than SIE, if I remember correctly. Please correct me wrong if anyone was new.
Yeah, it was specifically lower profits. So they still had lots of profit, but it was just lower than expected. So that's why they're doing the buyback.
But yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, we're actually in a fantastic place at the moment, where I think all three main platform holders in the space, Sony, Nintendo, and Microsoft, are all doing fantastically well at the moment, and that's only good for us, as consumers. The better that they're doing, the more investment they can put into hopefully just giving us bloody good games, which is what we want. Not only that, the fact that Microsoft are doing so much better seemingly this time around is fantastic for competition. It'll force Sony to have to invest, and then if Sony continue to invest, it'll force Microsoft to invest even more again. And hopefully, we as gamers or consumers will be the ones that benefit from it. We'll get more and better games in the future, which is ultimately what we want. So yeah, it's obviously one of those things where, like, I look at these figures and I see massive corporations raking in billions and billions of pounds of profit, and I'm kind of thinking, obviously it doesn't impact me too much, but obviously it does give me hope that these three platform holders are going to continue delivering great games for years to come. It's not like there was times during the Xbox, at the beginning of the Xbox One, where people genuinely wondered whether that was going to be the last Xbox console, because Microsoft cut funding to that portion of the business, and there was I mean, even Phil Spencer's touched on it himself before he was promoted to the leadership board. Xbox wasn't really something that Microsoft cared about at the time, but obviously these sorts of results really, I guess, highlight the value that Xbox has to Microsoft. Even though it's probably still just a smaller portion, but it really highlights that Microsoft are committed to, which I think is fantastic for obviously us.
Absolutely, Puxley. We're obviously talking very much from a game console perspective, but obviously PC is much more of a stable kind of market. It doesn't perhaps quite have the ups and downs, with the generations like consoles do. Although obviously, new graphics cards come along and stuff, but obviously PC games are much more resilient and cross generation when it comes to GPUs and stuff. Obviously, by their very nature, games are very scalable on PC. But even for PC gamers, it's great that the big platform holders like Xbox and Sony are making these huge profits, because obviously, as we discussed kind of at the top of the show, these platform holders invariably bring their games to the PC market as well. So it's actually great for gamers all around, including PC gamers. I mean, what's your take on how PlayStation, and I know we've already discussed Xbox, but how they will bring their games to the PC market over this generation as well?
Yeah, that's a good point, actually, because they've kind of changed their stance in recent months about starting to bring some, first-party exclusives to PC. I mean, mainly through partnerships with the Epic Game Store, because I think Sony are putting put more money and shares into Epic Games to support that. So I can understand why they're doing that, and I think it's a great venture, because as you say, PC gaming is massive, and it has been for like 20, 30 years, I'd say. Like really big, obviously, especially in the late 90s when 3D gaming and proper online gaming was becoming a thing. And I think, Xbox are definitely showing the message that, things like Game Pass or having an Xbox app integrated into Windows are kind of really showing their understanding that they know there are gamers out there who are just not going to buy a console, but they still want to deliver those experiences to. And I really like that Sony are starting to take that stance. And I mean, regardless of what you think about what storefront Sony are choosing to put their games on, I just think it's fantastic that they're doing that. I mean, I think most recently was Horizon Zero Dawn has come to Epic Game Store as well, and I played that for free as part of the PlayStation Play at Home initiative on the PS4. Absolutely loved it. I mean, if you care about frames, absolutely play it on PC, because you'll be getting it at 60 rather than 30 if you're playing on PS4. But I think that is one of many titles, which is a great example of games which a lot of PC players probably would have seen at the time, like the look of, but just missed it because they're not going to buy a console. But, oh, wait, hold on a minute. Sony are now interested in bringing their IP to PC, and now we can all enjoy it. I know I've jokingly said in the past how I'd love to see Ratchet and Clank come to PC. I know it's not going to be happening anytime soon, but I think Sony even doing it to this small level is definitely a great start for them. And I'd like to think that they'll see the success from that. And assuming that they do, I'd like to think that would encourage them to actually do it more so, that actually, yes, we want you to buy PS5s, obviously, to make a profit. It's what it's all about, and buy the games. But equally, I think both platform holders are understanding that their IPs are wanted on PC because people don't want to buy a console. And I think it's a great business move. I understand there's certain IPs that companies want to protect and stuff like that, but ultimately, that aside, I do think it's a great move that both platform holders have realized and seen the advantages of bringing IP from console to PC has.
No, that's good. Like you say, the huge profits that they're bringing in actually benefits all, even indie gamers, particularly around things like Game Pass as well. If Game Pass turns a profit and is very profitable, then it almost seems like a money sharing scheme in lots of regards. And thankfully, Microsoft seem to be quite responsible and are helping dish out the cash to some of the small indie developers as well. So everyone wins, basically, particularly us as gamers. No one wins more than us as gamers. Like Scott said, competition's fantastic. Like I said, I always class Nintendo as off on their own thing, and Nintendo will be Nintendo, and they will be extremely good and popular at what they do regardless. But I think Sony and Xbox and Microsoft have kind of got themselves into this symbiosis where they kind of need each other, and they're the ones kind of egging each other on and taking the lead. And I think that's absolutely fantastic. I think they like it. I like it. It can lead to the console wars, which can, I don't mind the console wars to a certain degree. It's when it starts getting serious and personal. That's when it all gets gets a little bit out of hand. But the memes and stuff, a little bit of fun poking and stuff, that doesn't hurt. I think it's all, a lot of it's in good spirit and is needed for the competition to thrive, perhaps in lots of regards. But my goodness me, what a show this has been. Excellent. How long have we been running for? Does it actually tell me that? I think we've been running
Well, we've got 2 minutes till 10 o'clock, so we are in time.
1 minute 58, 33 seconds to be precise. Fantastic. Thank you very much, panel. I hope you've had a good time. Luke, thank you for being here, my friend, part of the GPG crew, as always. Had a good one?
Oh, definitely. Yeah. It's I think, as we said, at the start, it's a bit of a different tact for this one, but it always leads to just these really cool discussions and kind of people jumping in, and it can sometimes be more interesting than even when the big topics come out, right? And as you touched on at the beginning, everybody's kind of spoken about them before we get to them, so it's nice to do these kind of ones where we get to just kind of show a bit more of what we actually think about certain things. So was awesome, absolutely awesome, really enjoyed it. Chat was incredible, so yeah, good stuff.
No, that's a very fair point. And to be honest, yeah, chat. A couple of things. Let's do some housekeeping. Please hit the like button if you haven't done so already. If you're new to the channel, like what you hear, please hit the subscribe button. Really appreciate that. But also, please consider joining our Discord server. The invite will be in the description below. Always, we can carry on the conversation over the next 7 days until we're back next week with the show. And if there's any questions you want to pose the panel or any topics you want us to discuss, please just let us know and we'll do it. We did that. Pyro Matt or Matt Diet posed the question and it actually turned into a topic in its own right. Fantastic. Absolutely love that. Puxley, as always, thank you for being here, my friend. Chat was on fire tonight. Did you have a good one?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, especially, I know we had a chat, behind the scenes before we went on about how we felt about some of the topics and, was there enough substance to them? But especially that review topic. I mean, we got into some really deep little rabbit holes there and the chat absolutely loved it as well from what I see. I mean, it was positively divisive, I would say, about how people think and feel about these things, all in good spirits. And also, I think some of these actually, as you said just a minute ago, Matt Dyer on Discord actually gave us the question, which kind of helped pose that topic on its own. So thank you very much, Matt, for that. And it's one of those things that we are actually doing, just to kind of plug a little bit here, that, we are starting to, we'd like you to pose us questions for things you'd like us to answer. And, if it has, all questions obviously have substance, but if it has room to be a topic, then by all means, we'd definitely love to discuss it on the show in further detail and depth. So if you'd like to do that, Discord's definitely the best place to do that. Please join the Discord, give us some questions you'd like us to answer as a panel, and thank you all very much for being here. It's been a great show. Really enjoyed it.
No, absolutely, and thank you for being here. But yeah, the Discord, we let out some little tidbits on Discord as well. You get some sneak peeks of stuff that's coming up. We have some changes coming. I know I've been teasing that for a little while. Hopefully they're not too far off. GPG will be changing to a certain degree, but we can't talk about that anymore at this moment in time.
Put it out there.
For the better, hopefully for the better. But Discord, the people on Discord servers will be getting a sneak peek of that before anyone else. So if you want to work out what that's all about, join us there. Scott, as always, thank you for being here, my friend. Did you have a good one?
As always, mate. As always, it was a really, really fun show. Actually, I loved a lot of the detail that we're going to do. As Pucks mentioned, some of the little rabbit holes that the topics took us down was great. And it's always good. As always, I'll say it every single week. It's always great to see some of the questions in the chat that we get. So thank you very much to everyone, and obviously thank you very much to Matt for posing that question, because I thought that was a really good, meaty conversation that we had around that one question.
No, it absolutely was. No, very grateful. No, thank you again for being here, Scott. Always fantastic chat. You were great. Thank you very much. Please help us spread the words. Like I say, like, share, and subscribe. If you can help us out in that respect, we will be eternally grateful. So we'll see you next week. We'll be back next week. And in the meantime, happy gaming, safe gaming, and we will see you on the next one.